One thing you can say about President Trump is that he is extremely unpredictable. There is nobody in the world that can know exactly what he will do, what his final decision will be. But I would say it is 5 to midnight for Iran. There's two options, I think. That you don't really build up such a massive military force in a region and then just go away and not use it. So I think it's highly likely that if we're going to see an attack on Iran, we're going to see it in the not too distant future. I would say it's quite likely. I wouldn't say it's by any means guaranteed. And we just have to think back about when Trump made his decisions what to do about Venezuela. He first of all moved significant military forces into the area. He didn't use them for quite some time, significantly against Venezuela, but then did so. And I think you've probably got a similar situation here where, it's unlikely you're going to build up all that force without using it. But the one possible alternative to that, I think, would be if there was a significant breakthrough on negotiations. At that point, Trump could say, well, I moved these forces into there, I threatened Iran, and they climbed down, basically. They couldn't face the prospect of what I was going to do to them. That might mean then there's no attack. If in that scenario, I think we're going to see something coming Iran's way from Israel at some point in the future, even without the US strike capability itself.
And Richard, you're a retired colonel from a British Army infantry colonel, former advisor to the British government on counter-terrorism, former commander of British troops in Afghanistan, but crucially, you also travel and have travelled many times to Israel. And as I understand it, you've met quite highly placed Israeli politicians and Israeli intelligence and military chiefs. If you were in the Pentagon and you were discussing or observing the kind of war plans for Iran, all the different options, could you sort of outline what those options are, from the basics to the sort of the most, as we put it, severe?
I'm not in possession of of anything like all of the facts that will be known in the Pentagon, so I will speak from a very limited knowledge point of view as to the exact situation now. But very clearly, if these negotiations fail, or if President Trump believes that the only option really open to him is military action, then there's a range of potential activities that he could order to take place. All of that begins with intelligence. And clearly, there's a very, very strong Israeli intelligence capability in Iran, both covering Iran and directly inside Iran itself. And I think it's inconceivable that the Israelis would have shared pretty much everything they have with the Americans to help with their targeting process. And the Americans also will have intelligence capabilities on Iran, not as extensive as Israel, but they will have them, which will build their picture. And also the UK. The UK has some intelligence coverage of Iran as well. And that would have undoubtedly fed into the United States planning. So once that picture is there and the president decides upon his objectives, then I would say that perhaps the primary objective now of a United States strike would be to end this regime in Tehran. That should be, I think, his main intention. And that can be done, of course, by a range of ways. By pinpoint attacks against individuals, which can be done from the air, or it could be done using special forces on the ground. If that was necessary, that would be a second preference, but it could be necessary. And that would include the Ayatollah Khomeini himself, his key henchmen, and the leadership of the IRGC, specific targeting against them to kill them, or in some cases possibly even to capture some of them, but predominantly to kill them. And then to carry out a slightly less pinpoint, but nevertheless fairly pinpoint range of strikes against key IRGC facilities, from which the regime controls the population of Iran, both in Tehran and in some of the other areas of Iran as well, to really neuter the IRGC as best as you can from the air. Much of it could only be done on the ground, which would involve obviously ground forces going in, which I don't think there's significant ground forces apart from special forces. I don't think there's much chance of that happening. So severe damage can be done to them. the other element would be cyber attacks against Iran, and we've seen in recent days and hours, we've seen reports of potential cyber attacks happening. Cyber attacks to prevent, first of all, to prevent the IRGC from attacking its own people, as they've been doing in the past, and also to prevent them from blocking the communications of oppositionist groups inside Iran. So cyber would play, I think, quite a big role. But before there could also be things like strikes on Iranian commercial facilities, like oil facilities, etc., which would be aimed at, again, undermining and degrading the regime and showing the regime's weakness. I think it would be critical to avoid civilian casualties. Obviously, in this kind of operation, it's impossible to absolutely say we will not have civilian casualties, but do everything they can to avoid them, because it's really important that the oppositionists in Iran see that the US is on their side, not in any way against them, which the regime will try and portray to them. So minimal possible death and destruction to civilian facilities inside Iran. Before any of this really happens, there has to be a significant defensive operation put in place, both to counter Iranian ballistic missile attacks or drone attacks or any other form of attacks in the region, particularly against Israel, which will be their number one target, but not necessarily their only target. The Ayatollah has said if America attacks, then it will be a regional war, by which he means he will strike other places in the region, like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, etc. So defenses against that have to be in place before you can do any of it, and also neutralizing Iran's air defense capabilities. And that's been largely done. That was done pretty much comprehensively by Israel in the 12-day war. Iran may have made efforts to try and rebuild it, but unlikely they will have succeeded very far so far. But that would be another element of a plan that would have to be put in place.
And looking at this dispassionately, I guess, would you agree that with much of Israel's proxy forces in Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, the Iraqi militia, having been largely dismantled by Israel since the Gaza war began a few years ago, would you agree that many in Israel and possibly America probably believe there's never been a better time, that Iran has never been more vulnerable to attack?
I think that's very true, and there's a number of factors involved here. First of all, Hezbollah was created, and its vast armory of its own missiles and drones were put in place exactly to deal with an attack by Israel or the US on Iran. They were to be used against Israel if either of those two countries attacked Iran. And of course, they weren't used because Israel did such horrific damage to Hezbollah by killing its leader, severely killing and severely injuring some of the most senior people in Hezbollah by the pager attacks, and also by its ground and air action against Hezbollah's military capabilities. They didn't eliminate that. It's still there. It's still a threat. Yeah. But that threat is quite significantly diminished. I think if there was to be an attack, whether it by the US or Israel, then Israel would feel obliged to go in again hard against Hezbollah in Lebanon to prevent the remainder of Hezbollah's capabilities from being used against them. Then there is, of course, Hamas, as you say rightly, that Israel has written them down dramatically. They're on their last legs, really. They control less than 50% of the Gaza Strip. They don't have any meaningful way of rearming and rebuilding themselves from external sources, given that Israel now has a stranglehold on them.
I think the latest in the Middle East is that there will be a meeting in Oman between representatives of Iran and the US. These are tentative talks. They've been cancelled, then they're back on again. What do you think that means? And does it mean that it is likely an attack won't take place, or what's all that about?
Well, I think President Trump probably wants to talk the regime down and make them agree certain terms, which they're going to find very difficult to agree. But obviously, if they did, it would be a major victory for him, and that includes, and I think is particularly the agreement to end their nuclear weapons program, some kind of adjustment at least to their ballistic missile program, And a couple of other issues have been mentioned as well in relation to these negotiations, which include the treatment of the Iranian people and also their sponsorship of proxies around the region. So all of those things would be very difficult to Iran to agree to. But if they do feel that their regime is under direct and imminent threat, then it's possible that some of it may be, may be possible. And I suspect President Trump might be willing to take whatever he can from that and proclaim it as a form of victory over the Iranian regime as well.
Have you been surprised at all by the strength of opposition from Iran to the US demands in terms of on the ballistic missile stance? They're saying, no, that's off the table. We might talk about the nukes and we might talk about the treatment of people and our attitude towards our proxies, but not the ballistic missiles. Were you surprised by that?
Not really. Of course, the ballistic missiles are a fundamental element of Iran's defense. Or indeed, as we've seen twice in the last year or so, their offensive action. So it's fundamental to them. If they would consider themselves to be really unguarded if they did that, and it doesn't surprise me that they would want to hold on to that. Of course, it may be that President Trump decides that concessions on nuclear weapons is enough, and he's prepared to accept the continuation of their ballistic missile program. I would hope not, but he may decide that. But of course, there's one country in the region that couldn't possibly accept that, which is Israel. Because of course, Israel has been attacked repeatedly by Iranian ballistic missiles and suffered some quite bad casualties as a result.